right, let's get started. I am pleased to welcome Alexandra Skoog-Hoffman, Director of Research and Practice Partnerships with CASEL. Welcome, Allie. Good to see you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Emily. Hi, everyone. And thank you for joining our Demystifying Systemic SEL webinar series. We have been digging into the 10 key elements that help integrate social emotional learning throughout our education systems. As Emily mentioned, hopefully many of you have joined our past 8 webinars. So we focused on explicit SEL instruction, integration into academics, youth voice, supportive learning climates, adult SEL, integrated supports, and continuous improvement. And so if you have not been able to check these out, all of the recordings can be viewed on our website, so please be sure to. Today, we're going to be digging into the role of family partnerships in implementing systemic social emotional learning. So what I would love to do is we're just going to start grounding ourselves with a moment of self-reflection. So what comes to mind for you when you think about family partnerships and social emotional learning? I want to just take a moment and jot down a couple of words or ideas on a piece of paper that's handy for you. So we're really going to be digging into this question at CASEL, and I'd argue the SEL field at large. We have long recognized that families are absolutely critical to the impact that social emotional learning can have on students' outcomes, because their parents are children's first teachers, and we know that social emotional learning begins at home. So we know parents and family members and caregivers are vital in helping children develop social emotional skills, right? Of course, and research demonstrates the positive impact that parents have on not only their children's social emotional development and engagement, but also their academic achievement. So with that, it's really important to consider that these partnerships, while vital, are not always easy to establish. So we're really hoping to unpack that a little bit. So the CASEL framework, if you remember our wheel with our rings, has highlighted the key ring of authentic partnerships with families and caregivers as a part of a systemic approach to social emotional learning implementation. And so what we've been doing is really developing and refining its understanding of how adults, and by adults, I mean both educators and family members and caregivers, how their SEL practices can foster really strong learning environments for young people. And so this idea of family partnerships truly is a key theme that we are focused on, particularly also in our launch of our SEL Innovation Series. So these are a series of reports upcoming which propose new and more equitable ways or approaches to SEL. So our inaugural report, I do have to pitch, is coming out next month, and it's titled Building Authentic School Family Partnerships Through a Lens of Social Emotional Learning. So while that's coming out next month, we were able to share, we'll share in the chat an op-ed that summarizes a few of the key takeaways from that report. So I hope you enjoy that. So to round out our grounding, we're going to watch a video to set us up that will allow us to, kick off this conversation about family partnerships that support systemic SEL and what that really looks like in practice.
Parents and families are our children's first teachers, and they know more about these children than our teachers will. So making sure that we have relationships that allow us to communicate and learn from each other and really better understand who our kids are, not just when they're in our classroom, but who they are in their lives, is really important part of developing a relationship, not just with the parent, but better understanding the student themselves.
Educators find that it is essential to have clear two-way communication with parents or caregivers, as well as an aligned vision of SEL.
So as you move from your family into the school, in many respects, that's a cultural shift. The norms and expectations within your family may be slightly different than those in the school. So the kinds of partnerships that we imagine would have families as co-learners, co-constructors of learning environments writ large in the school and outside the school, to create environments where young people clear about what are the expectations and the nature of the relationships with adults that kind of shape their world and help them to achieve their goals and dreams.
These family partnerships can be fostered in a variety of ways, but consistency and relationship remain at the heart of each strategy.
There are lots of ways to bring parents into the classroom without necessarily having parents physically in the classroom. So there are opportunities for homework assignments that actually require conversations between students and parents for them to think about, reflect on, and bring back into the classroom. I think having calls and meetings with parents, especially when they are not specifically around grades or discipline, are really important so that the parent feels valued and their opinion feels valued, not simply contacted when there's a problem. There's lots of ways schools can invite parents in as committee members on different committees that the school has, or to help them look and problem solve together, be on hiring committees, and really just be a part of the school community in meaningful ways.
I think the key thing is having multiple ways to communicate with families. And, you know, not only that, but just keeping track of it. With the Say Yes initiative that we're a part of now, we actually have surveys for the families as well. And they actually tell us what needs and supports that they feel their child needs. And so based off of that data, we help the families out and the children out as well. We have a school parent organization called a Principals Chat and Chew, where parents have a chance to voice your concern, but most importantly, identifying what issues that the children are facing and what programs that we could do or put together to bring to the school to help address these issues.
Without these authentic family partnerships, educators are at risk of not understanding the student's classroom performance in the context of what may be happening at home. One school in Cleveland combats this silo effect by bringing in a dean of engagement to make sure students are getting cared for in mind, body, and spirit.
My role is, as the Dean of Engagement, is to really address the culture. And so one of the things that I definitely enjoy is a mantra that we kind of have in the building in terms of once we capture their heart, then we can capture their mind. And so a lot of it comes from building relationships. We do a lot of things that are probably not in our job descriptions. It's really about meeting the needs of the students, and that's pretty much to sum it up. You know, what do they need? Because at the end of the day, that's why we're here.
We need to understand that people indeed are coming from different circumstances and backgrounds, and that there is no one size fits all for the ways we learn and develop. And so an equity in education would mean that everyone has not just equal opportunities or equal access, but a completely unbarred pathway to the future that they would shape for themselves.
Wonderful. What a terrific video. So what I'd like to call out for us is that we heard some key overarching ideas, but also more so needs in the video. So things like shifting our understanding of a family's role, that from spectator, but more to collaborator, and being really engaged and involved in that regard. The need for cultivating trust and trusting relationships between educators and families. And then also involving families in not only interpreting data and having that transparency there, but posing solutions together, again, in that collaborative way. So when these ideas, especially those of prioritizing relationships and really exercising one's relationship skill building and trust and collaboration, those are all integrated right into school family partnerships, and we are really all coming to that proverbial table together, and we are centering the best interest of our young people through our own partnership and through collaborative problem solving is really how we're thinking about it. So from a research perspective, I think it's important also to call out that the field has truly evolved over the past few decades, and moved from thinking about parental involvement as schools communicating out to families, right? Or families needing to kind of plug in into the school community, to thinking more about how to create authentic engagement. And so when we say authentic engagement, this includes two key ideas, right? So one, this idea of two-way communication between home and school, where folks do really feel like they can communicate back and forth with one another as opposed to school communicating out. And the second is creating opportunities for family involvement at home and at school. So really taking into account the multiple learning environments that our young people are in. So there is now more current research on engagement models that speak to both the conditions and then the actions necessary to really include all students, including those who have been historically marginalized. And so Dr. Karen Mapp's work, she is one of the creators of the dual capacity building framework. She's really highlighting that there are challenges that both educators and families face, as well as key conditions that are needed to be in place for successful communication and partnership. So we're going to speak to some of those key conditions and those strategies for building them in our conversation today with our panelists. So really looking forward to chatting with those who we have on the call today. So with that, I would like to welcome our speakers. I'm going to start with Dr. Sara Castro-Olivo. She's an associate professor of school psychology at Texas A&M University. Her research focuses on the development and validation of culturally responsive social, emotional, and behavioral interventions for English learners and their families. Welcome, Dr. Castro-Olivo. I also have Sarah Sanders here with us. Sarah is a senior regional director at Communities and Schools. A former high school special education and math teacher, Sarah now works with CIS to support school-based staff in bringing support to students and families in public schools across the east side of the state of Michigan. And Dr. Amber Majors-Ladipo is the Associate Director of Research at Village of Wisdom. In her role, she focuses on co-developing research processes and tools with parents that support parents and practitioners to create culturally affirming learning environments for Black youth. Welcome, everybody. So good to have you all on. So Sarah, I'm hoping you'll be able to kick us off for our conversation today. I'm going to start with the question of what should educators consider when partnering with families of their students?
Great. Thank you so much for the question, and thank you for having me here today. I think the first thing, when I think about family-school partnerships, many of the things that come to mind are actually based on Dr. Mapp's work, so I'm so glad that came up. The first thing that comes to mind is that families are not just parents. I think that's kind of a traditional notion that we have, but that families can include aunts, uncles, family friends, any caring adult caregivers, as well as siblings in that student's life. And socio-emotional learning is inextricably linked with home life and the family members that are at home and part of that student's journey. The second thing I think of is that school-family partnerships are a two-way street and definitely should be reciprocal. However, I do think it's on the educators and schools to start that relationship. So often in many communities, trust has been broken. The relationship between the school and the community may be fractured. And so it's on educators to kind of get the ball rolling and start that off. And so taking on that responsibility, and then from there it becomes that equal partnership that can be shaped and driven by families as well as the educators. The other thing I think about is just that we should consider the invisible ways that families are involved in their students' education and in their socio-emotional development. We always hear, oh, that parent doesn't come up for parent-teacher conferences, or that parent might not be physically present in the school, but that doesn't mean that the family is not involved. There are many ways that families contribute to their students' education and development from the home. And so I love that in the video, it was referencing that those soft skills that can be learned at home, many of which are socio-emotional skills. And we really need to build on those strengths. And then the final thing that I just want to bring up when I think of this question is that families know their children best. It said it in the video, and I think you mentioned it, Allie, as well, that parents and caregivers are students' first teachers. And so really, as educators, we can capitalize on that. We can build on that knowledge that families have of their youth. So it's important to ask families explicitly to share that knowledge with you as an educator. And one thing that struck me, and it seems so obvious, but one of my professors said once, all parents have dreams for their children. And that I just keep coming back to that because, again, right, it seems like common knowledge, but you have to remember that in the grind of the school year when things get stressful. You've got someone who calls and it's an upsetting situation, but families are the ones that know their students best. And so if we can start that relationship in the beginning of the school year, building that, and then get to know students holistically by getting to know their families as well, we're so much better off. So just remembering that families want the best for their children, and that as educators, if we can build that partnership, we're going to go really far in supporting youth.
Thank you so much, Sarah. I just want to underscore the idea that trust is foundational to everything you mentioned, and the idea of really valuing expertise of families in all forms, I think is critical. So thank you so much. Amber, I'm hoping to build off of that a little bit. What does equity in parent engagement actually mean? How would you break that down for folks?
Yeah, and so really building on this idea of trust, right? If I'm a Black parent, and I am a Black parent, but with the Black parents we work with, really thinking about thinking in layers, right? So it's one thing to say you're inviting parents to the table. I know a lot of schools have school improvement teams. It's one thing to say, here, join our table, increase our representation of parents of color. It's another thing to say, now we want you included in the conversation. We want to hear your thoughts. And then it's an even bigger thing to say, where do you feel powerful in having your voice heard? What makes you feel powerful in this space? And powerful in the sense that you won't just share your thoughts, but they'll be heard, maybe they'll be incorporated. And so I know that's really how we tend to think and approach our work at Village of Wisdom. And I also wanted to say, just related to trust and really building that equity in engagement, it's one thing to send an invitation, right? But when it comes to, does a Black parent or any parent for that matter want to accept your invitation, really understanding that they're more aware of like those narratives and those perceptions about their engagement and their children than we think they are. And so, really being patient and gentle enough to reflect on and understand that Black parents are reflecting on, what are your intentions by inviting me to the table? And then like, are you interested in partnering with me and learning from me, or funneling me information, or even having me comply? And so I think what Sarah mentioned earlier about really thinking about how Black parents are experts is a word that I want to use in their children's education and when you think about their children's mental health. So I would really say that's the approach to take, is really deeply reflecting on, what are my intentions for inviting parents to the table, and how can I reflect that back? But yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. The other thing that's bringing up for me, Amber, is this idea that what does harm is a tokenistic approach to this, right? Or a compliance-based approach of, oh, do we have our 1 to 2 parents here that we can check off the, oh, look, we have diverse stakeholders present. We're not about that. That's not what we're doing. It's this idea, again, of collaborative problem solving at the onset. What does it mean to truly embed community, right, and families and caregivers at the onset of conversation? So I really appreciate you highlighting that. Thank you. Sada, I'm hoping now to hear from you. What does authentic family engagement look like in terms of, again, we're going to go back to that idea of cultivating trust between educators and newly arrived families?
Yeah. Hi, Ali. Well, thank you so much for inviting me. Can you hear me okay? Great. Well, I think it's very important whenever I think about new arrivally families who are new to the U.S. It's important for us to really think about the equity, like framework, and then also think of I always Google, equity versus equality, and when you come up with that fence, where the kiddos are trying to see the baseball game, right? And equality, everyone gets the same type of box to be able to see over the fence. But of course, those who are taller, those who have the resources might actually get to see the games, and others, even with equality, they don't get to see the game, right? And equity, for ELLs, for refugees, new immigrant families, we really have to think about what is it going to, what type of box do they need, or how many boxes do they need to really see the game, right? And I think it's very important for schools and for staff to realize that it's not just the language. Many times, and I work with many districts in California, Oregon, and across different states, and here in Texas, and some districts are very, very good at engaging those ELL or new immigrant families. And some others just say, I don't know what's happening. We send everything, as you were saying earlier. We send the invitations in Spanish. We mentioned that everything is going to be offered both English and Spanish, but we're lucky if two parents show up, two new or immigrant parents or ELL parents, English language learner parents, show up to our meetings. And I think that the big difference is really for new immigrant families or refugee families, ELL families, I'm going to call them ELL to kind of just summarize the population. But for ELL families, it's really making sure that the staff who's organizing these partnerships, or it's really committed to building these partnerships, understands that it goes beyond language. It goes into understanding what is the view that they have, that their part that they take, or how important they are to the school system and the development of their child. Many parents come from countries where they were not expected to come by the school. They were really deterred, they were sent back. And it was kind of like, even in public schools, there were cases where parents will come to us and say, well, if I went to complain, or I went to share my opinion to the administrators or the teachers, they will say, well, if you don't like it the way we do it here, you can take your child to another school. So parents are coming, like new immigrant parents are coming with that framework. So for them to truly understand that, no, here we really want to hear about what's going on at home, what are the strengths, and it's very unfortunate because many times educators feel that, well, students already have this minus of not being fluent in English, or the families are not fluent in English. So they start assuming that there's very little that they can do already for them. And, they're not exploring the strengths that they have. And so the parents need that additional support for them to feel like, yes, this school is going to welcome me, not just by having someone who speaks a language like me, but for allowing me to understand and navigate the new school system that I'm in. And how is it that I can actually be a very active member of my child education trajectory. So those are definitely some of the some of the main differences that I see. It goes beyond language. It goes into be culturally responsive and understanding where the parents are coming from, the strengths, and building from those strengths. So it does require many times cultural liaisons and training one parent for that parent to train future parents, to make them feel comfortable and trusting in being in the system.
Thank you. Yeah, absolutely. I'm also hearing, based on what you were just sharing, this idea also that in order to establish trust, you need safety, right? And safety comes in many different forms. And really honoring that, I think, is important. So thank you for highlighting that. So the organizations that you all work with, right, and the research that you're doing offer frameworks for understanding this work and how to do it. So Sarah, I am hoping you can kick us off here. Communities in Schools has such a powerful model. It's comprehensive for school, family, and community partnerships. Can you share CIS's Michigan's approach to partnering with families? How do you all do that?
Absolutely. Thank you so much for asking. So Communities in Schools' mission is to surround students with a community of support, empowering them to stay in school and achieve in life. That community of support in all cases has to include families. We think about that community of support being at school, and then we're bringing in community partners and agencies and things like that. But the family is a critical part of that support network for students. And so within our model, and we are a national organization, and our Michigan affiliate follows the same model, includes 3 tiers of support. And within that, we do school-wide support as well as individual case management for students. And so at the beginning of the school year, we do a school needs assessment. And that's where we're looking at the school as a whole, and we're seeing what are the strengths of the school, and then what are the gaps and what are the needs that we can potentially bring in programming and resources to fill the gaps. And so as we're conducting that needs assessment, it's highly tailored to the school. I think all the educators on the call can attest to the fact that there are common needs as well as strengths across schools, but each school is highly individual. So we really try to honor that. And when we do that, when we're kind of researching the school and the surrounding community, we include families in that process. So we'll do interviews, focus groups, individual conversations, and surveys. And we do those for the school staff, we do those for students, and then we also do those for families. And we work really hard to try to get family voice into that needs assessment that we do, as well as the support planning that we do with what we find in the needs assessment. Kind of parallel to that, when we start our case management process, when we identify students who are going to be on the caseloads for our individual coordinators, we do a student needs assessment as well. So we're doing that same process, engaging with the family, hopefully in a very deep and meaningful way, because now we have that individual student that we're focusing on. We can call at the beginning of the year, we can do home visits to really get to know the student and know what their strengths and needs are. We're very strengths based, so we're not just looking for what are the gaps. That is part of it, but even more so, what makes this student joyful? What brings this student into the classroom every day? What makes the student feel safe? How can we support this student better? Again, asking families for that information about their students. Also asking families, what do you need? What do you need to support? And also, how can we be a better teacher or a better coordinator for your student? So in terms of the model, then as the year goes on, we broker and then and develop different supports for the school. And we really do try to focus on families as much as possible. We can do that through adult education, through family workshops, family events. And I'll mention it again, home visits are huge. When I was a student support coordinator, I would do that with another member of the school staff, actually going in to get to know students in their home environment, getting to know the families as well through that way. And then I think the final thing that I'll say is during the course of the year, we try to maintain those students on our caseloads for multiple years. We find that to be the most impactful. And over the course of whether it's several months or several years that you're working with a student, you can truly get to know that family. And in some cases, our student support coordinators, or if you're a teacher on the call or another school staff member, you might be that one person in the school that can bring a family in, whether that means physically or through virtual engagement or other forms of contribution. But really, we talk about all these theory and frameworks, but sometimes what it takes is just building a trusting relationship with one member of the school staff to get a family to feel safe in the school, to feel like they want to engage in the school, and to really feel like they're part of it in an authentic way. Again, not just as that, check the box. We had a couple parents at the Title I meeting, or we had a couple parents at our hiring committee. It's really, truly more authentic. So I think through our model, there are formal and informal ways that we have families engaged. But one of the most powerful ones is that authentic relationship building with the families of students on our caseload, so that they can start that engagement and start building relationships with other members of school staff as well.
Wonderful, thank you. I will say I can see in the Q&A folks are clamoring for any CIS resources that you may have, particularly around the needs assessment. So just wanted to put that out there as well. One of the things that really struck a chord just now with me, Sarah, is so I'm also a parent of 2 children, and one of the questions of do you know my son? What do you know about him? Right? Like, you tell me I know him really well. What do you know? And I think that curiosity and coming from that mindset really makes communication go a little bit smoother, right? So thank you for calling that out in those different strategies that you laid out. Amber, I am hoping that you can tell us a little bit about Village of Wisdom's approach, because it is incredible in supporting parents in their collaboration with schools.
Absolutely. And so with Village of Wisdom, I like to say that we have sort of like a village type of parent engagement. And so what that means is when we invite parents into the village, our invitation to collaborate with parents when it comes to their children's education and with schools is really thinking about how, in touching on another framework, but this idea that with Black families, there tends to be a communal approach, or can be a communal approach, to how we even think about our children's development, how we think about our own well-being. And so we really have parents thinking about not only how can their engagement support their child, but how can it support other children in that school and in that community. And we're based in Durham, North Carolina, so that tends to be where a lot of our work happens. But it really taps into the vastness of Black parents' funds of knowledge. I like to say them as former Black children who were in school environments, right? Them as Black parents who have raised their children from birth. And then they also, I like to think something that we might overlook if we're just looking at them as parents who we need to engage is they come with other expertise. We work with parents who are trained as early childhood educators, parents who are licensed educators, parents who are trained as other support personnel. And we have what we call a community-driven research approach. And so that's really thinking about going a step further than asking the community questions about their involvement, but more so we work with our parents to say, what questions do we want to ask, right? And when it really comes to what I would call our two big research aims are building culturally affirming learning environments for their children, but also including Black parents in essential education decisions, as we call it. So those decisions that are really influencing, those systemic level changes that create those affirming environments. And what I really want to add is that when it comes to our approach, we both train parents. So I know Sarah mentioned adult education. So we train parents on some of those community engaged research approaches, and then we support them to apply some of those methods. And I would say sort of at the end of that cycle, we really think about when they're applying those methods, how can they stand in their own leadership and being able to do that in their children's schools and in their communities. And I also like to say that when we're doing that with parents, it's also healing, right? Because it's not just parents sort of saying, what should teachers or schools do? But parents are also healing in the ways that they approach their own parenting, their own ways that they think about their children's education and what's possible, and the history behind what influences their children's mental health in schools. And so that's a little bit about our approach and the sort of skills building we take with parents.
Wonderful, thank you. Yeah, I think one of the things that I find most striking and impactful, Amber, is this idea also that like engaging families in the data inquiry and solutions process is actually also empowering families, right? Like we are really taking it to that level. And yeah, it's just really powerful when it's in action. So thank you. So Sada, I am, folks, I can tell also in the chat are really interested in some partnership strategies that you have seen in your work that support EL students linguistically and or culturally. Anything you can share with us on that?
Yeah, sure. And I have to mention, I'm an EL myself. I came to the US in 9th grade. So I've been working in the field, especially doing research for over 20 years, work with a lot of different school districts. And in my experience, what I've seen, and going back, not just for how to best support ELs, but focusing more on the families. What I've seen in the districts that are most successful to actually getting those parents to come in and truly feel empowered, where I felt surprised. I remember even starting as an assistant professor going into different school districts to ask, for permission to come in and try my youth program. They'll say, well, you need to come and talk to our DLAC, and DLAC stands for District English Learner Advisory Committee. And I thought, oh, that might be like maybe 3 or 5 parents, the district-wide level. And I was very surprised to see that at least in this one district where I feel like it's still my exemplary district, The day that I went in, and I only had 10 minutes to talk to these parents, there were over 50 parents in this DLAC meeting. It was in this, in the same room where the school board meets. There were actually the main board of the DLAC for ELLs. It was conducted in Spanish. There were actually interpreters for those who didn't speak Spanish. And the advisory board for this DLAC was sitting in the same seats that the school board were sitting. So it just gave me the goosebumps even before I started talking, because it made me feel, wow, this is what a truly empowerment looks like, for a typically, marginalized or historically marginalized population. So I was very surprised, very pleased to see how empowered the parents were. They were making decisions about hiring, new sorry, the word is leaving me, but it's mainly the individuals who support the English language teachers, so mainly the mentors, the coaches at different schools and in the districts. So they were making decisions. They were sitting, in those interviews, and they were making these decisions as a district-wide community, because they had the board, but each school from that district, and this was in Southern California, where about, I would say 65% of the population identified as EL or was receiving EL services. So it kind of made sense, but I had been in other districts with similar demographics, and I had not seen a DLAC to be as active. So I started investigating what is it that makes this district have such of empowered DLAC members, right? Because every school had the representative there, one or two representatives, and they had a fully energized, board. And it really was more of the family engagement person from the district. They had a department at the district level. These individuals not only spoke Spanish, and when they had an EL from a language that spoke a language other than Spanish, they looked through their community to actually get cultural liaisons to support those families. They did a lot of home visits, like Sarah was mentioning, to try to identify what is it that you feel that you need, and conducted a lot of parent trainings or supports. I walked into their family engagement. They actually had a portable by the school, the main school district office, and it was full with books in different languages. And actually, they were offering English language or ESL classes for the parents. They always had some type of daycare, so they had truly listened to the parents of what they needed. They had done their homework and gone to their homes to try to really get more information of what is it that these parents need, to see that we are truly wanting to support them and want them to support us in developing the academic and social emotional well-being of their children. So for me, to this day, I still go back and feel just so energized when I think about the school district and all what went about, but also all the supports that they were getting back from these parents, because these parents were extremely active to the point where they came back to me and said, we love what you're teaching our kids. Come and teach it to us, because we also want to have these SEL skills and teach them from home. And so it was just, as probably is clear from how excited I'm sounding, it was just a dream come true. And I think that was mainly possible because of the efforts the district has made through this family engagement department to really, really get to all the parents in the school district.
Great, thank you so much. I am also, monitoring our Q&A, so thank you everyone for inputting questions. There is a question that I'm going to pose to all of you, so please, whoever would like to take the first crack at it, by all means. But we know that developmental stage is important in SEL implementation, right? Like what works for early childhood doesn't necessarily work for middle school or high school. So folks did have questions about any sort of strategies that you would recommend for families with ECE, early childhood, the little ones, in those early childhood settings. Any strategies or recommendations that you have seen in really garnering authentic and supportive partnerships with families in your work? Yeah, go for it, Sarah.
Thanks. So most of my work has actually been with older students. So like high school is when I taught, I was in a high school, and we do in CIS of Michigan work K through 12. But one strategy that I've seen work across the board, especially though with our younger student population, families, is connecting families to each other. So parenting is stressful, and developing and supporting youth can be stressful, and there's also a lot of joy in it. And to be able to share questions in those moments of joy as well as stress with other parents and family members. So creating a space, and it doesn't have to be physically, it can be virtual. We've seen a lot of success with virtual space, since pandemic, we've gotten creative. And some of that I think will extend into the future as well. But creating spaces for families to engage with other families. So bringing people together to talk about parenting in early childhood as well as with adolescents. So that's just one strategy that we've seen where it's a way that that families can get engaged with educators and with the school, but also using the school as kind of a place to connect families with other families as well.
Sarah, if you don't mind, I also got a question for you specifically around how you match the coordinator to the family.
Great question. So there's actually one student support coordinator in each school. So any student that was identified as part of the caseload in that school would be with that coordinator. In an ideal world, we'd have multiple coordinators per school, and there could be more of a matching process, but it just is school specific. Right.
Wonderful. So again, I think one of the drum beats that I continue to hear throughout our conversation is this idea of fostering this trust, and that takes many different forms, but particularly in including them in the decision making processes. And I think we've kind of heard that loud and clear in different ways. Are there strategies that educators have had success with with whom you've worked with that hasn't fully overextended their capacity and their time? What do you do, or what do you say? I mean, educators are working, they've always worked hard, but I think it can be said that they're working even harder these days. Any strategies or takeaways that you all have seen in your work in doing this?
I can share a little on this, and mine is going to be about more at the level of what is the school enabling in terms of
Right.
space and time for educators. And so we have worked with some schools to do what we call just an examination of, their institutional readiness to support not just our work, but when we think about creating affirming environments for children and families, what is your institutional readiness to do that? And so what we've done with schools is we've actually looked at, well, if we do want to see change in the school environment, we want to see educators being more attuned and attentive to their students. What are you offering your educators to do that? And that can be, and it's more of an exploratory question, right? With the school and the parents, so that it might be parents and educators in that space. And so it might be brought up that, educators need to be paid more. And then how would that offer space? So it's really an exploratory conversation. It might be brought up in terms of when you're giving educators opportunities or those days to rest, and then you're giving them days to do teacher work days. How are you focusing more on how that time is allotted for teachers to actually do that work instead of working overtime in the afternoon or outside of school hours? So that's a little on an approach we've seen or used, but yeah.
And I can share a little bit what I've seen. And of course, it's always hard to say that it doesn't, require more work for the educators. Typically, at the beginning, it requires a little bit more work, and then, that I've seen them being able to stand back. But in probably the first the first year or so, or at least the first few months, I've seen educators taking the time, if they take the time to meet the families and really make those connections with parents, parents many times just start feeling just so much respect and gratitude to the teachers who took the time at the beginning of the year to really learn more about their children and meet the needs of their children, that whenever they need a volunteer, to help them with something else, or to help them with, we're going to have this event for parents, can you help recruit the parents have a hard time saying no, because they already feel in debt, to these teachers who have taken the additional time at first, to support. And I think, from the district that I was mentioning before, that's a lot of what I saw, that there got to a point where parents were doing most of the heavy lifting because they really felt that the district had given them the space and made them feel safe about being able to actually support their communities, that they were willing to do that work. So I think it takes a little bit, and I really like what Amber was mentioning. I think that administrators in school districts need to realize that, especially these times, teachers will need probably an additional work planning period, right? So that they can take the time, not just to plan the lessons, but also to reach out to families. Because even as a parent myself, I always feel that when the teachers take the time to get to know my children and to get to listen to me about what are the strengths and how can we really help use those strengths to help them in the areas that they're currently having challenges in, it makes me feel so much gratitude, for that teacher, and makes me want to just give more for for whatever they need to make sure my child is successful in school.
Great. I got so excited when you were both talking, and I just want to tag team very briefly, really what you both mentioned, but Amber, when you were talking about creating the space institutionally in schools, really resonated with me. It brought me back to the first few years when I was teaching, feeling like I was, I was writing curriculum, I was lesson planning, I was, grading, doing all the things you have to do, keeping records and preparing for IEP meetings. And for all the teachers on the call, I'm sure that's, something that you're experiencing, and there's just not enough time. It seems like there's not enough time in the day. And so one of the best things that ever happened was when our administration in our school created the space for us to make phone calls once a quarter to every parent. And we had the whole list of school, the school list of every family member, so caregiver of each student, and we divided it up, and every caregiver received a call. We did it as a team. And one thing I've brought from my teaching years to CIS is a caretaker calls. It's a semi-scripted document where we provide it to our coordinators, where at the beginning of the year, and then hopefully, at increments throughout the year, they can make those calls. But you really do have to create space for it. And so a call to action for people who get to make decisions about how professional development time is used, how staff meeting time is used, open up the space, make it a working session where everyone's sitting with a script, and it doesn't have to be completely scripted, but it can be helpful to provide that for the, foundationally, and then a list of caregivers to call, and making those calls early in the year so that it's a positive phone call home first, and not your child's in trouble or failing a class. Really starting off on a good note. We just have to create the space. And so whatever position we're in as educators, whether we get to make a decision about how that time is used or not, but really educators need more time. And I would argue that taking 15 minutes away from my lesson planning and using it to make 3 phone calls was more impactful in terms of the next day, those students coming in and being way better in class and feeling more connected than using the time on planning. So it's an allocation of time thing. And if we can create that space, I know it's a very tall ask, but I think that's really the way about creating that institutional readiness that you were talking about.
Sarah, thank you for calling that out. I was having flashbacks. The power of a positive phone call. To be, as crass, like that is a return on investment that you're going to get. When that first phone call is discipline related or some negative, I mean, what you're really doing is you're messing with your classroom culture as a teacher, honestly. So really appreciate you shouting out that strategy. The time is worth that investment, absolutely. I do, again, I want to make sure we're trying to get as many of your questions answered as we can. A question that came into the chat was, any advice that any of you can give on introducing families of various cultural backgrounds to school-wide common SEL strategies or a common SEL language for home implementation. Anything that either you've seen or that you all have tried.
Well, I'll share a little bit on this. I've definitely seen a lot of schools and some school districts wanting to send more like newsletters home in different languages, you know, and kind of talking about what is it that you know, the SEL topic of the week, you know, like maybe focusing 1 week focusing on empathy, the next week maybe focusing on problem solving. I think that that is a great start, you know, for more like school-wide implementation. I do think that for some families, you know, and especially depending on their cultural background and how much time they might have, some families might not get an opportunity to even look at the newsletter, even if it is in a language that, you know, they're comfortable reading. So I think it's also important to try to establish, you know, that the schools that I've seen to be more successful, they try to establish some type of a family or a homework that requires the kiddos to actually ask the parents or talk to the parents about those specific skills, so that at least, you know, that the kid is practicing what they saw in or what they talked about in the school, and then talking, you know, to the parents about, I know my daughter, I feel very happy when she comes home. It's every Friday, I think, that they have their SEL instruction in her school, and she's always talking to me about, you know, they start with something positive like optimism, you know, and something positive going on in their life, and she tells me what she had to say and what her peers had to say, and ask me about, you know, what do you have to say about positive in this last week, mom, you know. And so it's really it's really powerful, because you know, parents are extremely busy, and I know I'm one of those parents that there's been times that there's new letters in my daughter backpack that I don't get to clear out until the end of the month, right? So when I see that the backpack is too heavy, I'm like, let me see what is in here. But if she talks to me about it, I'm most likely to, you know, and it is, you know, unfortunately, I do think that at this point, it's still my job as a parent from a multicultural background to make those connections, multicultural connections for my daughter. And I think that this is where the schools, where we can be doing better, depending on the multicultural classrooms that we teach in. But yeah, stuff.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you, Sada. Yeah, I think that especially when we're thinking about bolstering or supporting one's self-awareness and their identity, right? Those are conversations that families are already having, and to be able to really, I don't know, center that, I think is really, really powerful, and also just honors and recognizes those identities, right? That our students have. So appreciate
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. I'm sorry, I was just going to add, when you mentioned identities, you also made me think of the program, my program that I have piloted and tried with many different families. And in our program, we talk very specifically about identities. And for many immigrant families, and I'll just say this, and for many immigrant families, this is the first time that they are probably thinking about their own identities. So even when we talked about what are some of the cultural values and beliefs, you know, that you're most proud about, they struggle to think about some of these things. And so if they're struggling, it's going to be a struggle for their kids too. But once we talk about it as a group and they start realizing the power of their identities, it is really beautiful to see, and beautiful to see how they're able to integrate that to SEL.
Great, thank you. So we are nearing our end time. I would like to ask Amber, can you just share any sort of final call to action for either parents, educators, school leaders who really want to engage in this kind of work authentically?
Yes, and so I would say with the authenticity, right? And I did hear the question that's sticking with me that someone asked is engaging families who have different circumstances. I think I saw that in the chat. And so I think what it really requires is a level of humility for us to not assume that, oh, this is a single parent, they won't be able to do this, or they won't be able to do that, or, oh, there might be a language barrier here. So kind of step back from the assumptions and be more in conversation with families. And I would also say an approach that we have taken is understanding that sometimes things might need to go a little slow at first, as you are building that trust, as you are understanding, okay, what will it take to bring parents to the table? That might mean, oh, we're giving parents not just gift cards, but we actually pay our parent leaders who are onboarding with us. And we've had a lot of lessons about, oh, there might be a timeline in place for that. But guess what? If we're really committed to doing this work alongside families, how is it that we can continue to check back in and slow down as needed and kind of go with the pace of the community, right? So I would say, to me, that's the big call to action. And that's really where we start, is going at the pace of the community, because they'll let you know, how things are going and where they want to go.
Thank you so much. That is what I needed to kickstart my Friday morning. I will tell you that. So I just want to say first to you three, thank you so much for joining us and just sharing, right? All of the knowledge and expertise and learning and co-learning with us here at Castle. Just want to call out, we really, as I mentioned, think about this idea of what does it really mean to shift our understanding, right, of family roles and from spectator to collaborator, and what does it mean to do that from start to finish in the relationship, I think is important. The next one, really thinking about this idea of trust. If you're walking away and you don't feel like you really thought about the concept of mutual trust, then we didn't do our job. So let us know. But that is foundational to this work in this partnership. Absolutely. And then the last being this idea of what does it mean to bring families to the table from design to end, particularly with grounding in data, and what does it mean to be really solutions oriented with families and not just for families. I think it's those three big ideas are what really got solidified for me on this call with you all. So very much appreciate you all.